1. All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on this is the show, we're going to have Brendan back on, and we're going to talk about some things related to how to respond to pain and or injuries in training when you deal with them, and then also importantly, how to communicate that with your coach, because I think that's probably like the most important thing for athletes to understand is just how do we actually talk to your coach about pain. So number one, this is something that if you are listening to this and you're a powerlifter, you're lifting weights in general, you're likely going to deal with some pain and or injury at one point in your training career. So that's why Brendan and I think it's important to talk about this.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of funny because in this sport, you'll see a lot of people that get injured and they're like, oh, I need to go to like emergency care, go get checked out. And typically what happens is you go to like your primary care physician or you go to like the ER, you get checked out real quick. Typically they tell you to take 6 weeks off or 8 weeks off and don't do anything,
Mm,
which is exactly what we don't want to do in this sport, especially when you have people who are experienced like Adam, myself, when it comes to injuries managing pain, programming around pain, adding in rehab work, all of that stuff. Like a lot of times they're really surprised because you can bounce back a lot quicker than what most people expect if you have the proper guidance.
right. I think it comes down to number one, just like understanding like what is pain in the first place, and pain is just in a it just is a kind of like an alarm bell saying that something is likely being stressed pretty hard or beyond its regular capacities. If you think about like lifting weights in and of itself does cause pain, and anyone who has been training for a while has dealt with muscle soreness, and that's that's pain. But when we're starting to get high levels of pain, that's basically just a sign that your body's giving you to, I guess, just like be aware that something is being stressed, likely to its breaking point. I would say that's pretty accurate, but Brendan.
Absolutely. And I think, a big thing what happens too is where does pain stem from? The brain, right? So a lot of times what happens is people get injured, they catastrophize, and it turns into like it's just a snowball effect. You're going to send more pain signals. It's just going to make the issue way worse, essentially. Um, so a lot of times where people really go wrong is they really just spiral downhill. They ramp up all these pain signals, and a lot of times it's like, okay, where do I go from here? So,
Right.
but Adam, and I know you've had your fair share of injuries over the years too. Um, what's kind of your process? How do you go about things right off the bat? You have an injury, an acute injury. What are your steps right away?
I think for myself, it's like in that session, I'm likely going to first off like generally like lower down the weight and see if I can do something like what can I actually do as far as that movement pattern. Um, But like, if it's just like, okay, I'm clearly in too much pain, usually I'll just find some, accessory or variation in that session that I can get some volume and it doesn't cause pain if that's possible. Um, just try to keep moving and still get in some sort of a stimulus in. If I figure out that like, I can't do anything, then that's fine. Just, I just go home and will like rest it until like I feel like I can train it. I think that the main thing though is I'm I think one of the things that a lot of coaches make a mistake of is they don't pull back enough initially um, when they are getting when the client is experiencing pain and or injury because and a lot of times I think that there are some freak scenarios, but a lot of times like most of these injuries in powerlifting or in bodybuilding, they're not this all of a sudden like I never saw that coming. They're usually like things that kind of like slowly creep up, like tendinopathy or low back ache or back issue that slowly builds and builds until you kind of, it gets to be so bad that your body just yells at you and it's like, you have to like really, really um back off. And so I think that, if I'm at the point where I'm in so much pain, like I like to be more aggressive with the management initially because I find if you pull back enough initially, that gets your body, your brain to kind of calm down. You get out of pain, you usually get some extra recovery, and that's what a lot of injuries I think in powerlifting are related to because I think the biopsychosocial model definitely does play a large role in our pain experiences, but I think that, if you're a powerlifter and you're like squatting 500 plus pounds, you probably have some sort of recovery issue or potential tissue damage there, and it needs to have some more rest. And then long term, it's just about looking over. the overall training program, what as far as load management needs to change with the hours intensity, with the volume, with the frequency. Do we need to add in some exercises that are going to help out with strength in different positions? Is the fatigue just generally just too high from training? Is that causing of fatigue? Okay, what do we need to do to manage that? So I think that long term obviously it's programming. Short term, like just bite-sized takeaway is just it comes down to figuring out what you can do, and then pulling back enough to get your body to start to actually recover. The only time when it gets to be tricky is if the client is in prep. I think that's when I'm less prone to like the whole like pull back as hard as possible. But even then, like I found that like just taking off like a day of frequency, even like yeah, someone might lose a little bit of strength skill if they really need that. They're doing a high frequency approach, but I don't find that that really tanks their strength that much. What about you? How much different is what I outlined from what you usually do?
I think that was pretty spot on load management wise. And you covered a lot of that stuff. Kind of going back to the whole like when people get injured, they tend to freak out. I think what happens with a lot of people is they just don't understand like the mechanism of injury. A lot of times in barbell sports, mechanism of injury wise, unless something traumatic happens, you drop a bar on your back, um, something very traumatic happens. We're so resilient. We have so many different structures and tissues kind of keeping our whatever it is, spine in alignment or joints together. Um, a lot of times what happens though is people have like that pain and they're like, oh my God, is something completely broken? Um, and kind of the route I like to tell a lot of people is like, look at NFL football players. They have like these 300-pound machines basically running after somebody and tackling them. Unpredicted. They're not really, predicting the hit, and all of a sudden they hit them, and it's not like their backs popping out of place, their knees completely, popping out. I mean, it happens time to time with like knee injuries, ACLs, like fluke accidents, but a lot of times you have a lot of force coming at you in these situations, and yeah, again, it's not like their spines popping out of place from a hit. And kind of the similar concept to like powerlifting. Like we repeat these movement patterns over and over again. We're more resilient to these movement patterns because we train them consistently and sub-maximally. And just a lot of times, it's not going to be something that's like traumatic and career ending or, you're never going to bounce back from. A lot of times, you're just going to basically the body is very, very advanced. We self-heal. We're not like cars where we break down. We need a mechanic to work on it. It's like we have this incredible ability to self-heal over time. So, um, the way I like to do like look at things too is like time is our best friend. If I can kind of help guide somebody to get them through it a lot pain free, add in some different like drills, accessory movements to kind of, you know, get those tissues to readapt. A lot of times time runs its course too. And we just have that incredible ability to self-heal.
I think an important thing too as coaches is not giving like a timeline of like this is when it's going to get better. It was like it'll get better when it gets better, and I think not rushing that process is also incredibly important. And then also understanding too, along the way, it's very normal to have some fluctuations in symptoms.
Definitely. And I will say, as far as like timeline wise goes, there are tissue healing times as long as we don't re-spark or kind of re-tear a certain tissue. If you have a tear, for instance, there are these tissue healing times that kind of occur over the course of the injury. But what you'll see with a lot of people in chronic pain, if you just look at general timelines for tissue healing, a lot of times they're far past where that tissue healing point should be. And from that point, that's where it kind of turns into like a neurological issue too. It's like, how can I retrain my brain to stop perceiving whatever it is as a threat? So,
Yeah, I
just
think
getting the
I
move.
think
Yeah.
that's really hard because like a lot of times it's like I think that's just like from my own experience, it comes down to like a self-fulfilling prophecy with like how I'm moving. Like generally people will find like some sort of compensating pattern to
Yep.
like deal with the pain, and it's about kind of like getting into that pattern more frequently. And I guess like obviously you don't want to piss it off too much, but it's like on my squats, like I do really well like if I have a little bit more of like a little bit more like a fast initial like descent, and letting my and like allowing my chest to come up and like not being afraid to like load my back versus like when I was constantly in pain. It was just like always tempoing, always being very like aware of it mentally and thinking about it. And I think that's one thing too. Is like if you're constantly hyper aware of like every little sensation you have, like lifting, it's kind of like in a deload week. It's like whereby people are like, oh, I feel so beat up, and yeah, you might have some higher levels of fatigue present, but a lot of that's just like your brain just being like, okay, like I should feel fatigued right now, you know?
Right. It's interesting you bring up that point about like being able to hit that hole hard. And that's where a lot of like obviously load management comes into place, just getting you like feeling better for certain sessions. But also just adding in those few key like little accessory like movements, drills, rehab work. Whether it's something you can pinpoint, like I'm lacking internal rotation on my right side and I'm really externally rotating very hard. Just adding in some simple exercises to really just facilitate getting you in that position and being able to maintain that position. A lot of times you're going to see that bleeding over to squats. Or, for example, like if somebody's kind of a wide stance squatter, one hip's externally rotating like crazy, the other's internally rotating like crazy. Reinforcing just a more set movement pattern, whether it means I kind of potentiate myself through moving through machines where I'm stuck in that more fixed range of motion, or also adding in like single leg work to really prime, internal rotation, the adductors, the glute med. But just really it kind of potentiates you. So when you get to your competition movements, you're going to feel a lot better getting into those strong positions.
Yeah, and that's what I meant about like the whole like rehab exercises, like a real rehab is like getting stronger in different positions and that's really what these exercises do. And so, I think one thing with how Brandon and I program is, obviously muscle growth is a big part of, our accessory programming strategy, but if you have somebody who's dealing with like some sort of issues with mobility, which is, strength in a certain range of motion, then adding in some exercise that's going to, improve that will help out a lot with just being able to train long term, stay healthy, and make sure that you guys like the strength of that certain area is at least like keeping pace over time with as you keep getting stronger.
Absolutely. And I will say to kind of like piggyback off of that, I'm really big on just becoming strong through different planes of motion as well. You'll see in powerlifting, you're so stuck in that sagittal plane. A lot of powerlifters become like unathletic, unable to move through different movement patterns, different planes, which I encourage, like, get strong in all different ranges of motion. Like, it can only help you for the competition movements too. Let's say you do have a little bit of a deviation, a rotation, or something. You're going to be a little more prepared to handle that position if you're stronger in all different ranges of motion. Um, so that's where, like, even as a powerlifting coach, I'm not afraid to add in some different, more athletic stuff, getting people to move through like rotation, transverse planes, the frontal plane. It just makes you a lot more versatile as an athlete. And again, I see really great carryover and translation into the power lifts and just staying healthy long term. Um,
Could you give
and
some examples of exercises in those planes, just so people know?
Absolutely. Something as simple as like a rotation with a medicine ball, something simple as that. And it's a very wide variety. Like you can't just look at, movement patterns as just a one set sagittal plane movement. Let's get strong moving through different planes. And that's why I will say this. A lot of times you'll see somebody come out right out of high school as a lifter, and they get right into powerlifting. They're extremely athletic. They're strong in a bunch of different ranges of motion because they're constantly moving, shifting, doing different tasks where they have to be explosive. But I will say, like having that athletic kind of background and being able to move through different planes of motions proprioceptively, it equips them a lot better, and it just makes everything a lot easier when it comes to the powerlifting movements. And I'd argue with those lifters, they're a lot more resilient because they have those adaptations through loading through different planes of motion.
Right. Well, I think that all makes sense. So, I think also one last thing I want to mention before we go into communicating, I like how you mentioned that, like we're not like cars. I think that that's a big thing that people, we hear that all the time. Like cars don't adapt. Humans do adapt. And I think more so thinking about, um, I think of like a pain, it's kind of like you can build like a callus, with your
I was
body.
actually I was gonna talk about that right after.
Go ahead.
No, but basically, It's very much like a callus. The only difference is like, let's say you have a tear or you have some type of like lesion or something. Let's say you tear your hand in lifting. Um, you have that kind of visual feedback to look at it. Okay, or how are we healing up? So where it becomes a little bit different, let's say it's something internal and it's a muscle tissue, it's your quad or whatever it is. But we no longer have that visual kind of feedback to see how it's healing over time. So that's where that like subjective rating comes into play, right? Like we have that callus. I can still get a little stimulus to that callus, and I can probably still even deadlift to some degree, but I don't want to get to the point where I'm re-ripping that open. I have a similar concept with the quad tear. We just no longer have that visual kind of feedback. So we kind of have to base it based off subjective just perception of how that tissue's feeling and not overdoing it. And that's where that pain rating kind of comes into play. And you always hear like that classic 2 to 3 out of 10 pain level. That's where you want to play and keep training at. Um, but yeah, very similar concept. And it's again, we want to allow that tissue to heal, but we can still get some loading and stimulus to it to make it a little more resilient. So then over time, we let time take its place, tissue heals up, and now that baseline still it hasn't dropped too substantially because we're still loading to some degree.
Right. And that's why, it's like when I say I'm aggressive, it's like for like maybe like 1 or 2 weeks tops. Then I'm always trying to like reintroduce things gradually so that that callus can build, like you said. So if you have a client, Brendan, and they're like, what's the best way for someone to communicate to you? Like if they're in pain, they think that they're injured, like what are some things that you need them to tell you?
Yeah. So funny enough, there's a ton of clients I've had over the years where it's almost, I don't know if they were like ashamed or kind of like scared to tell me they're injured. But then it's like, man, like, let me know and we're going to have a rehab plan right away. Probably before you even leave the gym, like, I'm going to be sending some form of a rehab plan or just some movement patterns to start loading that tissue immediately to kind of desensitize, turn down those pain signals, get a little stimulus, blood flow to that area. Um, but basically, I like to hear like, I'll kind of ask them like, okay, what sensation did you feel? Did you feel like that classic, was it like that ripping of a piece of paper where something tore? And that's kind of like your classic muscle strain. And you'll see some people where they're like, yeah, it felt like a piece of paper was just ripping. Like I felt it, I heard it, it just ripped. And then again, I like to kind of guide them through different movements right away and kind of get feedback. Okay, how's this feeling? Even if it's super light, getting like moving through that range of motion again. And sometimes it can be something minor, like it can be something that was a fluke, and it's like, oh, it really scared me, but now that I'm moving through these ranges of motion, I'm already feeling a heck of a lot better. So, just getting feedback too on like, was it something acute? Is it something chronic that's been going on for a long time? And that can really help me navigate it. Like, how are we going to proceed going forward?
Yeah, I think that the main thing for me with clients is just like I just want an honest about assessment of like how bad does the pain hurt? Like what happened when it was causing it? Was this an all of a sudden thing that came out of nowhere, or have you been kind of been noticing even having some more fatigue or pain symptoms in that tissue or not? And then going from there and just making a plan based off of that. Um, I think that like I can be honest with you. I mean that was kind of my issue with like Joe with like squatting. I was always kind of in pain. Never like really told him I was like I'm just gonna like work through it. I think it's and the reality is like it's not normal to like have like pain when you're like in training like long term. I think that's more the issue of like chronic pain. If you wouldn't this is my opinion I guess, and you can let me know if you did disagree. Well, I think just chronic pain is just long term poor management of external variables, just programming. That's how I look at it.
And
Acute pain.
it's always a multitude of different factors. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so many different things that go into play when it comes to injury.
Yeah. And then I think that just as people are going through the rehab process, I just I want them updates like after every single session, like really like how do you feel like in the morning? How do you feel like during the day? So that can tell me a lot about how we are progressing. If someone's like, yeah, I used to have like a lot of pain like in my hip, just like walking around, like especially after I would squat, and it's like now I don't have it. It's like yeah, that's really good. Like we're probably in really on the right direction versus someone's like, it kind of feels the same. I'm like, we probably need to pull back a little bit more, or whatnot. Like that's something that I take a look at.
Yeah, and you can use a lot of these competition movements as a strategy of rehab too. It is a stimulus. If you get them moving through that desired range of motion, you're going to adapt again, as long as you don't push that threshold too much. Um, and that's the huge benefit of like rehabbing powerlifters. They have this incredibly high skill level and capacity to load these heavy loads, and they just have this high skill moving through a range of motion. So it's like I can definitely use that to my advantage and use that as a form of rehab too, if we really manage pain. And again, like you were kind of saying, you'll have some people with hip pain and they go through a squat pattern and they're like, wow, I'm already feeling better. And that just goes to show like it's a good dosage and it's a form of rehab too. You're moving through that range of motion, you're getting feedback to the brain, and you're stimulating those tissues on top of things.
Hmm. So I guess you do plenty of rehab consults. Like what are the main things that you tell the clients, like as like this is like a takeaway of like how you manage them like over the long term, outside of that acute phase.
Yeah, so I'm huge on education. So I really want to well equip my patients, my clients. I really want to well equip them with like the knowledge of how the rehab process is going to go. And what I like to tell people too is, give me feedback session to session. I want to know how you're feeling, but nonetheless, the rehab process, it's not going to be perfectly linear. You're going to have ups, you're going to have downs, and just knowing how to strategize accordingly for each session, kind of taking what that session presents. And, again, if you start stacking those small wins over time, you're going to get to that end point. But the biggest thing is, maybe you have that bad day and you kind of dip a little bit. You don't want to freak out. You want to keep doing what you can on that day, scale back as needed. And that next session, a lot of times it kind of works its way back up. But that's the biggest thing with the rehab process too. It's going to undulate up and down. But the biggest thing is over time, we want to be trending up. Whatever rate that is, take your small wins. If one thing doesn't go well, but another thing goes well, that's a win. And just, I really prioritize really implementing like a positive, optimistic mindset for these clients. Not allowing them to snowball or freak out. It turns into like, okay, we're going to let time do its thing. We're going to add in all this rehab work. We're going to load accordingly. Things are going to work itself out over time. Um, and just again, I've done this for a long time too, and there's so many different strategies I have towards rehabbing a client. And one thing I like to do right off the bat is I like to say I cast a big net. If something tends to stick and there's one exercise that really does that, it's that golden exercise that really fixes whatever it is. And it's making them feel really well. We're going to run with that. Or, maybe I casted that first net and nothing really caught hold. Okay, well, I have these backup routes that I'm going to go with things. I'm going to feed them that and ideally get one of those things to catch and hold. And all of a sudden, it makes the biggest difference. So again, just really having a wide variety of different tool strategies to really rehab that client, whatever the issue is.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think these are all really really good points. I think in the next episode I want to talk more about like how like I guess like your specificity or like could be like causing pain and like your training split and how to like modify that based off of different pain symptoms. So I think that's a really important thing. But I think it just as general takeaways for the audience from this episode is pain is not something that you need to freak out about. It's just a symptom of having some sort of stress that your body could not handle at that time. And the best thing to do is just to not freak out about it. Find what you can do. Find an entry point as far as an exercise, volume, and intensity. Communicate with your coach and a qualified rehab professional if needed to find a strategy to get you back to lifting pain free. Um, and you just accept that it's going to be a long process and there's going to need to be extensive communication between you and your coach, and the strategy will likely have to change over time.
Definitely. And yeah, if you guys ever need more help or you've been dealing with chronic pain and acute injury that you want to really rehab and get back as quickly as possible, Feel free to reach out to either of us. Like we're very well versed in like rehab training modalities, to really just get you back to doing what you love. And that's what it's all about too, like getting you back to health, full health. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of like having this knowledge as a coach. Um, Me and Adam both, we know how to get somebody back as quickly and as efficient as possible versus, if you don't really know what you're doing in this process, you're kind of just spinning your wheels. And before you know it, there goes like months of quality training and you're just constantly upset, in pain. Whereas, reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to help you out.
100%. I'll include links for that down in the show description. If you guys have any questions about this, you want to, talk to us about what we said in this episode, too, our DMs are always open on Instagram. Those will also be in the show notes. But thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next one.